Thanks everybody for sticking around and participating in the CoMotion conference. Hope you've had a great day today. I'm Lily Schaup. I am a managing director at Rebel, and we work on projects with the public and private sector, developing projects and concepts for how people pay for mobility. I'm excited today to talk about one of the most interesting parts of that work, which is how people pay for driving and roads. When I started working in transportation planning and policy in a few years ago, road pricing and VMT fees were all at the top of everyone's mind as coming soon and the next big thing. So excited to participate in this conversation today. Here we are 20 years later, talking about how it's definitely coming soon and how transportation technology innovation is really changing the conversation about the feasibility of some of these policy approaches. I'm excited about the panel that we have today because we're going to be hearing from a variety of different organizations and perspectives in the ecosystem of roadway pricing. We're also going to be hearing from folks about different policy approaches to roadway pricing. Oftentimes people think of one particular policy approach when it comes to pricing, and today we're going to hear from folks about different approaches and different types of policies that are working or being studied around the state. So I'm going to have the folks introduce themselves quickly, and then we'll get going on a pretty fun discussion. So I'll start here.
Good afternoon. Anup Tapase. I'm a transportation planner at the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the San Francisco Bay Area. I work on long-range planning projects and also the project manager for our study that we are currently doing, exploring freeway pricing strategies in the Bay Area. And thank you for having me here.
Hi, I'm Mike Manville. I am a professor of urban planning at UCLA, and congestion and congestion pricing are one of the areas where I do my research and teaching. So excited for the discussion.
I'm Danielle Coachman. I'm the manager of strategic partnerships at SANDAG. I work in the planning department, but I dropped planner from my title. I like to focus on the implementation side of things, making things happen. So in addition to all of our pricing strategies that we look at and incorporating them into our plans and programs. Also looking a lot at how we can deliver projects using new project delivery methods.
Hi, I'm Mark Thalianatos. I'm an executive officer in the Office of Strategic Innovation at LA Metro, and also have been serving as a project manager and advisor to our traffic reduction study, and look forward to our conversation.
Amazing. Well, Danielle, I'd love to start with you actually and thinking about your role in the San Diego region. So SANDAG has included various policy approaches to roadway pricing in its recent plans. And I would love to hear a bit from you on sort of what the conversation at the board and with the stakeholders has been like around those, and how is that informing your strategic thinking around what's coming?
Awesome. So about a year ago, I was here at CoMotion talking about something completely different, but I shot myself in the foot without knowing who was in the audience. So I can't see anybody here, but I just want to see if there's any elected officials from San Diego. Okay, cool. So we included we were updating our regional transportation plan, our blueprint for the future of transportation, that was slated for adoption in 2021. And we have some aggressive mandates, greenhouse gas emission reduction mandates in the state of California that we are required to achieve, and they're challenging. And so we knew pricing was going to be a big part of that. So we started off, any good planning process, looking at what our objectives would be, what we were trying to accomplish, and really identified a bunch of pricing strategies that could help us achieve that. Among those pricing strategies was the inclusion of a road usage charge. Not just, the state talks about shifting from the gas tax to a road usage charge, but an additional one on top of that for our region. And this was also layered with some priced managed lanes and fees on Uber Lyft rides and a couple different pricing strategies. They were all accomplishing different policy goals and all had its unique place within the plan. We have a rather contentious board of directors for the last few years, and they're very involved and engaged, and also really like sound bites for the local media. And so the conversation became very politicized. And over the course of a few months, as we worked towards adoption of that plan, there was a lot of our board members going on the news, a lot of them, writing editorials, doing all sorts of different, coming out against it for a variety of reasons. And everybody has their own reason. People will cite specific, the landscaper that has to drive to get to work every day and have all these different reasons of why it's bad. But ultimately, it's, we came to them with the solution. And I think that was some of the mistake in the approach, was that we already knew what the solution was, and just because people didn't like it, it became, something that was easy to come out against and get a lot of attention, just to be frank, as part of that. So, we no longer have the road usage charge as part of our upcoming plan. That's something that, we have been directed to do by our board. It's really funny because in the process, in some of this, there have been discussions around what alternatives have been. And a lot of the alternatives that board members have come up with sound a lot like a road usage charge to me, but just a little bit different. Like only applies to EVs, or, which are all things that, we talked about would be the, potential for the original proposal. So, really it's about what are the policy objectives that we're looking at, and bringing community members, bringing stakeholders, bringing the board members along for the discussion, leading the horse to the water and hoping that they figure it out. And if they don't, then we're all doomed.
And on that hopeful note, thank you. I mean, I think that's a really honest assessment of the difficulties that all of us have faced in talking about asking people to pay for things that they don't normally pay or don't usually pay for now. Anup, I would love to come to you and think about in the Bay Area, where you were used to having difficult conversations about things like this. And how are you sort of navigating those inputs from stakeholders and the public with the Next Generation Freeway Study?
Right. Difficult conversation it is. There's a reason we all are here in this room today from LA, from San Diego, from the Bay Area, because we're facing similar challenges in that there's growing congestion and our existing toolkit to manage those strategies just hasn't been working sufficiently. And we are all also in the face of, as Danielle said, this state-mandated greenhouse gas emissions target that we all need to plan for. So that's what our study is trying to do, figure out if there are equitable and fair ways of implementing pricing. And through that, we've been having multiple conversations with the public and stakeholders alike. So with the public, I will say, I'll talk about a few different reactions we hear. The first is the most expected reaction, especially when we spoke to them last year, that they are frustrated. Questions like, why can't we just add more lanes? Or why can't we just have rail go everywhere? Or is this just another money grab? Are you all just trying to get more funding? And so we tried to get a little ahead of this time when we just went out to the public recently and had a better narrative about explaining, not just a narrative, but to really explain the issue at hand as to why does more lanes not work? Or why does building rail to every corner of the Bay Area when the land use is so spread out just not possible? So that's one category of things we hear from the public. Second is affordability. People are just really frustrated with how unaffordable things are for the right reasons. Very harsh critiques, things like this would be the last straw before we get pushed out of the Bay Area, or there's just no disposable income, you're taking away food from our plates. And so those are very real concerns, and we are hearing them and thinking about what should be the right strategies to address affordability with a pricing strategy. And part of that is a big part of that is predictability for folks. People want predictability of how much they might pay, especially people with lower incomes. So that's one. There's a category of folks who are also think positively about this. They say things like they are supportive of finding strategies that work for the region. They want their money to go towards working for the climate. They want less stress. They want more time with their family. And if this is really going to work, then I'm all for it. And this is not just advocates and transit advocates and environmental advocates I'm talking about. I'm talking about members of public. And then finally, I'll say that most of them, all these categories that I mentioned, plus the rest, are also very skeptical in general. Like, will this actually work? You may be telling us it works, and I'll hear you, but will it actually work? And but if it works, what's going to happen next? Are the tolls going to go continuously higher and higher with inflation? Are they, transparency. Like, they are also very concerned about, you're telling me there's going to be revenues from tolling that might be put towards transit and other things. You've told me that before too. So how are you going to ensure transparency?
No, great points. And I think also important for, as you said, to break down the critiques that we often hear into different types of reactions. It's not just one size no, but there's a lot of rationale and a lot of reasons that folks have. Mark, I'd definitely hear from you. So from LA Metro, which is both the transit operator and also has a role in managing express lanes throughout the LA County region. Tell us a little bit more about the impetus behind the traffic reduction study and, some of the analysis that you've been seeing here in the region.
Yeah, so the traffic reduction study was called for in our 2018 strategic plan, specifically to look at some of the most traffic clogged parts of the region and whether pricing plus reinvestment in transit was a solution. And so it's a conceptual study. It's not like a traditional metro study where we're doing an environmental process to choose one alternative to build. We're looking at how, if, where, when this may make sense. But I think that a region that has some of the worst traffic in the world, it will and does make sense just how to do it. How to do it politically, given the challenges we've heard and that we will see here, no doubt, and logistically, like what area, what type of pricing, reinvestment. And so we've looked really at 3 geographies in LA County in some detail. One is downtown LA, whether that's a cordon pricing around it or instead the freeway arms that are going off it. We've looked at the Santa Monica Mountains between the San Fernando Valley and the West Side and the Basin, and that we've looked at full pricing of 3 freeways and 12 arterial roads. And then we've looked at the I-10 West between downtown and Santa Monica. And intentionally, I think the choice was look at these kind of different options because it is a study of what might make sense. And each of them has, advantages and challenges. The Santa Monica Mountains is some of the worst traffic in the world. They're the 405 and the 101 intersection. But it also does not have robust current transit service. It's a mountain range. It's not a commercial downtown well served by buses and trains. So if we were to do that, we need to bring in much more transit and other alternatives. Downtown LA does have some existing and improving transit. There's concern among some business stakeholders that the COVID pandemic hit the economy hard, aren't as many people coming in as before. So we'd have to do some economic analysis and try to make sure that if we move forward on congestion pricing downtown as part of like a recovery for downtown, not a psychological barrier around it. And the 10 West modeling shows like a improving performance on that freeway, but some slowing around it because it's only a single corridor. And I should add, we've also looked to some extent at an earlier study by SCAG at a West LA Santa Monica model, and talking to Anoop and looking at their study. We're interested potentially in the future on a model more about multiple freeways. So we're really at a point now where we've looked at what kind of pricing would work, to send that price signal so 10 or 15% of people would not drive, freeing it up for other people. And then to make it a win-win also for transit riders to take net revenue and reinvest it in more frequency, in new rail lines, improved stations, shuttles, active transportation, street safety, whatever makes sense. And finally, we do know that in LA County, there are many low-income households who do drive and rely on cars. So we need to have, and we're studying robust low-income assistance programs so you wouldn't put a financial burden on anyone. And so where we are, we've done that analysis, we've done some outreach, we're combining the input from both, and we'll need to, at some point, go to our board and see if they would like to move from this conceptual phase into actually examining and designing any of those options.
Great, thank you. And to take us home, no pressure, Mike, would love to hear from you a bit on, we've heard from a couple of different approaches here, right? So we've got priced managed lanes, a network approach, a congestion fee, a congestion charge, or a road usage fee. And while there's a lot of similarities there, there's also different impetus or policy goals behind them. Some of them are revenue-raising measures, and some of them are sort of demand management raising measures. We'd love to hear what your insights are from the literature and some of the experience you've seen around the world.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think even within a particular program, in one place, people will look at the same proposal and seize on different benefits, right? And I think, for instance, in New York, where they're moving toward doing a pricing schematic in Manhattan, part of the impetus for that is Manhattan just has terrible congestion, but a big part is this is the only way in their mind that they can raise money for the transit system. And I think the most important thing that we know from the relatively limited experience we have with road pricing in the world right now is that it's really important to sort of get straight what you're actually trying to do, because your goal implies sort of small but important differences in how you go about pricing. Like if you just want to raise revenue, for instance, the best thing to do is charge a very low price to as many vehicles as possible and try and hide that price, right? So people almost don't notice it, right? So you're going to get the most revenue if people continue to drive, they pay a small price, and they don't really change their behavior at all. And this is why, for instance, a lot of turnpike authorities in the United States, when they moved to toll gantries, you no longer had to hand money over to someone when you were driving through it, they all just raised their rates, right? Because people just weren't as cognizant of what they were paying, and all they wanted was money. But if you actually want to change behavior and make the road sort of work better, then it becomes really important that everyone, every time they think about driving, is really cognizant of the fact that they're about to pay. And so if you look at a toll transponder in Singapore, which has had some form of electronic congestion pricing since the late 90s, that transponder, every time you drive under a toll gantry, it actually flashes how much you're paying, so that it has this psychological nudge to say, like, oh, maybe you should have walked or taken the train or something like that. And I think, my sense is, especially in the US, if you're going to go down the road of doing some form of road pricing, it doesn't make sense just to do it for revenue. Revenue is very important, and maybe politically it's appealing to sort of say you want to raise revenue. There's a lot of things that people would like the government to spend money on, and that sounds better than saying we're going to charge for roads. But I think the main way to think about congestion charging is that there's all sorts of different ways, at least conceivably, that a government can raise money. And most of them are actually more efficient than putting toll gantries everywhere. But there's only one way to actually reduce congestion, if what we mean by reduce congestion is like, this road now moves at 45 miles an hour all the time. And that's by charging for the road. And so really emphasizing that if you're going to do this, the real unique benefit that comes from it is that it makes the road perform better, it makes the driving experience better, and that's kind of the selling point.
Amazing. Oftentimes when I speak about roadway pricing, it's less about the mechanics of it and more about would you support having a guaranteed fast, reliable trip every time? You might not pay to take it every time, but when it's there when you need it, and in many parts of LA right now, that isn't an option. There's just no way to get where you need to go fast and reliable in that way. On that, I'd just be curious to hear from any of you here, sort of how are there messages or problem definitions that you have seen really resonate in the California context, thinking about road pricing? Are there ways of talking about this that seem to make sense to folks, either transit users or people who drive, that could help folks in the audience or around the world think about this differently?
When Metro's done focus groups on this twice, back in 2019 and recently, the most popular one is kind of a broad one, like Metro has a plan to improve mobility, or Metro has a plan to solve traffic, and pricing is part of it. And when you go into more details on different elements of that, emphasizing sustainability or equity or other things, it doesn't really help. Pointing out details of successes and improvements in travel time or reductions in air pollution or mode shift in like London, Singapore. Stockholm does nudge it a little bit too, to know there's concrete examples, but if you talk to people more, they're like, well, we're not London, So really it's kind of like you hopefully the trust in the fact that we have a plan to do multiple things. One of them is pricing. That can help us.
We're not London, but we are California. And I love to talk about different industries, and I love to talk about the lightning lane at Disneyland. It's my favorite thing ever because I have a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I do not like people congestion. I don't like being in crowds, and Disneyland has got it figured out. Like, they do it really well. And if you talk about it, the good customer experience that people get from other examples of pricing, that helps manage congestion. It's almost exactly the same thing. They have dynamic pricing. It manages congestion. And everybody, it's affordable-ish. So everybody has access, but they're able to, if you want to go on Indiana Jones, you got to wait like 6 hours and sign up and then wait for your turn. So there's real examples that aren't related to government that really helps people realize that it's not just evil government trying to charge you for everything. Customer experience, good.
Anything you want to add from the Bay Area? Because it sounds like your conversations have been slightly different in your outreach.
Yeah, just to reiterate what I said even earlier, it's we have to meet the public where they are when we're talking about this, right? And they just have, for right or wrong reasons, they have a lot of misconceptions. Misconceptions about why can't we add more lanes, or why, what are we doing with the gas taxes and the DMV fees you all are collecting? And so we just felt it is really hard to have a quick 5-minute conversation with someone from the public about road pricing. In fact, we decided not to have those kind of outreach methods like pop-ups and things like that, to just have passing conversations about it. We figured we need to provide good amount of context, even if that takes 15 or 20 minutes, build that narrative in the right way so we gain the trust of folks before we can, at least to some extent, we're never gonna get in the trust of folks to all the way, but at least to some extent to have a productive conversation.
Yeah, I think all of that resonates. I think there's no question that this is a hard political sell, and it will be up until the moment, whenever that may be, that some of these things are approved. And my conversations about this are much easier than your guys, because I don't have an actual plan I'm pushing, and I have tenure and no one can fire me, so I can just say things. But I do think, to Danielle's point, it is helpful to remind people that, like, in almost every other area of life, we count on prices to prevent shortages, right? There's the lightning lanes at Disneyland, but also just like if you talk to people about their everyday transportation experience, like in Los Angeles, a lot of people have to drive everywhere. We do not run out of automobiles. We do not run out of gasoline. We run out of road space. It's not a coincidence that the road space is the thing we give away for free. And that's true of, the water that comes out of your tap and your electricity and so forth. Like, we meter these things for different reasons, and one of them is to just sort of nudge people to use it so that it becomes reliable. And I think it's not the dirty secret about climate change, maybe it's not that much of a secret, is that most people at the end of the day don't care about it. Most people in Los Angeles don't ride transit. They don't care about transit. Like, they say they will, but like, I think the selling point to make to a region of drivers is, if we do this, driving's going to be great. You hate your driving right now. Have you ever sat in a lane and away somewhere and said, I would pay anything to be out of this congestion? Well, that's congestion pricing, right? It's there for that reason. And so I do think we really want to your point, you want to meet people where they are. In California, people are drivers, and you meet them with that. This makes the road better.
Manville for mayor. Love it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just add something small. I thought of 2 points. I think one, in conversations, reminding folks how driving is so different in other parts of the nation and the world is important. It's a reality for people in New York, Tennessee, Illinois, Florida, Texas, so many states on the East Coast, to just pay to drive on a regular basis. Agreed, that pricing had a different objective of raising revenues to build roads, and we're talking about something different here. But the main psyche we're coming across again and again is in California. There's a right to drive. There's a freedom. There needs to be a freedom to drive, and so just reminding folks that it's different in other parts of the nation, and let alone places like Europe. I'm lost my train of thought of to what Mike was saying in terms of just like bringing people into that mindset of like, how much would you pay if you were sitting in congestions? Like, I think something that has helped in the last few weeks in the way we're talking to public is we're trying to show them sample trips of what driving could feel like in 2035. So actually putting it up on a map, showing a driving trip, saying like, what would the time be without pricing? What would the time be with pricing, the way at least we have forecasted it? And then trying to get people to picture, like, if when you are sitting in bumper to bumper traffic, how much would you value like having that extra time every day?
I love the idea of the visuals and the lived experience of the streetscape as part of the conversation, for sure. I'm also thinking through, it seems like, at least to me as a person who both takes transit, walks, bikes, and drives in LA County, that you also need to think about the revenue reinvestment in making the overall system work better for people. And so I'm curious, I think a lot of us think about the revenues from express lanes or toll lanes going back into highways. But what about all the other benefits that could go towards transit operations, fast, reliable bus services, park and ride lots? And what is the timing of those that need to be in place? So they can't be coming in the future, but may need to be in place before the pricing or the express lane opens so that people can get used to it in advance. All that takes money and investment, though. So I'm curious how if those are part of the considerations or the narrative that you're seeing in your agencies and in your organizations when it comes to sort of, we need to have those projects done first before we can get the pricing going.
I think, for SANDAC, we've been thinking about corridors holistically. The last time we added some HOV lanes, which will be converted to hot lanes in probably 2-3 years. It was an entire package of rail improvements within that corridor, bike facilities, and the highway expansions, interchanges that needed to be adjusted as well. And so I think, when you improve a corridor, it needs to be all at once. When we think about, managed lanes, price managed lanes, a lot of what we're trying to do is keep buses reliable because it becomes an attractive option if the buses are on time, frequent, and reliable. So that's, one of those big goals of, the managed lanes themselves. And I think that, that's some of the things that it's the overlap. I talked a little bit about how my role both looks at kind of pricing and also alternative delivery and innovative delivery types of things. So, lucky we can, sell toll revenue bonds, and get everything built at once and deliver everything at once to make it one and make everybody happy too, no matter whether you're a transit rider, an environmental activist, a driver. We can give you a package of projects.
It's definitely part of the narrative in terms of that transit improvements or transit options need to go in place prior to the start of tolling. That's how other regions have done it in Europe. Now, and there are tools to do that. You as Danielle said, you bond against future revenues to raise funding. There are also federal, potentially state grant opportunities that could because the federal government is supporting the idea of congestion pricing and does have it in its latest legislation and the bipartisan infrastructure law. So potentially there might be grant opportunities there to accelerate transit projects in support of pricing policies. But so while options can be improved, we also have to be a bit real and say that options are not going to improve for everyone. Our land use is not going to change overnight or even in 10 years, right? So the bus is not going to reach every person living in the suburban areas. So what can we do perhaps best to improve options in areas where there is high potential for those that might move away from their car to move away from the car, and for those that have to rely on the car, either because they just live in a very suburban region, or perhaps they have to carry tools and babies and just have inflexible work patterns or something like that, they get something that they're paying for. They're getting that quicker trip, so that some other folks are switching to that transit option.
And we agree from the beginning of the study, the idea has been you need to bring in high quality transportation options before simultaneous with pricing. And just to give some, I guess, ultra local examples here, let's say if there was a future downtown LA congestion pricing zone, well, across the street, there's Little Tokyo Station, which was an improvement to linked our two of our light rail lines. But what would it take to get them to 5 minutes frequency, right? Down a couple blocks away, there's Star of the Arts District, which has had growth in employment and residential recently. There's no rail station there. Metro has a plan for a rail station at 6th Street, but there's a funding gap. So could you envision a new rail station? Could you envision looking at what our riders are most concerned about, which is essentially cleanliness, reliability, safety, and frequency, and homelessness on the system? Well, could there be dedicated pools of money to clean the stations more frequently, or to have more ambassadors and more security, or or to fund some of our across the county our low income, our low fares or free fares within the zone? So there's a lot of things we could do with funding that would enhance alternatives. The concept being that someone who might have driven a path before would now get the price signal Mike talked about and think, maybe I should try traveling some other way. I can take Metrolink, I can take Metro, I can take a bus, I can ride my bike. And so to enhance all of that, so there's viable options. So we're excited by that possibility. We're working inside our agency with the planning and operations department on a fairly long list of projects, kind of at a conceptual level right now. And we've asked the public kind of for input on that. And let me do a quick advertising. Metro.net/traffic reduction. That's a project website, but it has a live survey on there. So if you hit the survey link, it has some of our maps and our charts. It has questions about things like what kinds of services we should reinvest in. And we're interested to hear from experts like yourselves, like what would go well with pricing and in our areas we're looking at it.
Was that allowed?
I mean, I think it's a tricky area, right? On the one hand, the revenue is a huge part of the benefits of pricing. And it's not. I think in most models of congestion pricing, the actual revenue sort of exceeds the time savings, and so it's there, and you should spend it in a way that helps you build support, and also, as I'm sure we'll talk about, protects people who might not have a lot of money. But I think there's two complications to that narrative. One, which Aaron alluded to, which is that like we have this long history, especially in California, of broken promises about transportation revenue. Right, the California has diverted its gas taxes for years and years and years, and now when you say to people, we're going to charge you this and spend it on that, they're like, I don't believe you, and they have a reason for not believing you. So the bad governance of yesterday does haunt our attempts at innovation today. But I think the other thing that happens is that it's really important, oftentimes when the revenue comes up, it's because people say, well, we need these options. The train doesn't come to my house, so we can't have congestion pricing. And I think lurking in that, a sentence like that, is this idea that once congestion pricing happens, there's going to be some people who just can't drive at all. And that's just not the way it works, right? It's just there's going to be people who, to different extents, drive a little bit less at peak times on very busy routes. Like there's lots of ways to avoid a price besides, is there a train right there? Like, could I make this trip at a little bit earlier or a little bit later? Is that worth it to me? Could I make the trip to a similar destination but shorter, or one that doesn't take me on this road? Can I carpool, thereby immediately cutting my toll payment in half? And again, I'll just analogize this to other forms of infrastructure. Like if I'm cold in my house, there's only one way I can get heat. It's through my thermostat, this essential thing that like they're just going to charge me for it. If I don't feel like paying for it, I can put on a sweater. Like there are ways to do that. I think so. One thing that happens when people bring this up is it's important to say, yes, we're going to spend revenue, we're going to give you more options, but also to remind people that like this price isn't going to be so high that you're permanently priced out of your car, right? It's just going to be high enough so that, as Mark said, that small portion of people who account for most of the delay, right? Because the congestion is a very nonlinear phenomenon. 5-10% of the drivers are, that's 20-25% of your delay. you get them off the road at a given time. So it really isn't that punitive.
Can I ask a question? When this is just kind of for everybody, but Lily, when you asked the question, you said, you have to introduce alternatives, at the same time. And I think that we talk about that like that's a given. And, I think that that's achieving a couple different things, right? And I was just kind of counting in my head. It can be, to maximize behavior change. It can be to gain support because you're not telling people like, we're going to charge you and you have to pay. It can be to address equity. So there's like a variety of different things. So I was just kind of curious from people, like, why is it a given? Like,
I'm sorry, I'm the moderator. You can't ask me that question.
But even you, Lily, like, what do you think? Why do you think it's a given? Why do we have to provide alternatives at that time for all three of those, or one more than others?
Yeah, I mean, to build on the lovely metaphor of the being cold in your house, I think that if you don't, if the thermostat is something that you're not wanting to change, you need to have a variety of sweater options that can meet your needs for getting around or for getting warm. So I think it not only makes it feel more palatable that somebody who maybe says, well, I drive for everything now and there are no other options that work for me, you need to have some other options that could work for them, such as, oh, well, then you could drive to a park and ride lot and take the bus that's going to be getting you there on time because they're using an express lane that's that allows it that trap. So that was the impetus of the question, is that it's both providing actual options, but also I think helps people who maybe drive for every need now see that there might be other options available to them.
But it still doesn't apply to everybody because you have like the landscaper with the mower that can't take it on the train. So it's always an outlier. Maybe he can.
I will say that our Express Lane program, which is 10 years old, has done sort of a combination of both. It has funded the Silver Line, which is a very visible bus, BRT, kind of freeway running, street running. And we've talked to some of our stakeholder groups or our advisory bodies at Metro. They point that out, that people see it. It's right near the freeway. It's paid for by the lane, so it's a very kind of tangible sense of benefits. But then the Express Lane program, every 2 or 3 years, it does a call for projects with the revenue to keep funding stuff. So rather than going for all of it at once, they do sort of bring it in, pay it out. But I think for congestion pricing, because of the political challenges, it will be useful to have, here's a package of improvements that comes in with it, so you see what you're getting right away.
I know that UCLA has done quite a number of both studies, but also sort of focus groups and surveys and other research tools to dig into this question of the inequities and the perceptions of equity when it comes to road pricing. So curious if you could share any of the insights from your team on some of that to inform this discussion.
Yeah, I think the concern that arises is a very natural one, which is that a congestion charge would be regressive, right? I mean, if you just charge whatever price is necessary to keep a road moving at, say, 45 or 55 miles an hour, like Metro does on its express lanes right now, that toll is going to be a bigger burden on someone who makes $20,000 a year than someone who makes $100,000. And I think that's a real concern, but it's also not unique, right? Like, that's also true for lots of things. It's true for rent, it's true for food, it's true for electricity, it's true for heating oil. And one of the things that we try to get across to people who ask us about this is that, like, there's no other realm where the solution to that equity concern is that, well, this thing should be free for everybody, right? Like, the fact that some people can't afford food does not lead anyone, even the most, I think, left-wing social justice advocate, to say, well, all food free everywhere. Right? No, this is why we have the food stamp program. And so this can be a problem that comes with its own solution. You're going to raise a lot of revenue, and you can use some of that revenue to sort of take care of people who are, choose your metric, below 200% of the poverty level or something like that, and make sure they're not overly burdened by this. And then there are, in general, very strong sort of second-order effects of pricing a road that are highly progressive, right? Because one of the biggest determinants of localized air pollution is traffic congestion, vehicles idling on a freeway. California has historically done this horrible job of allowing people to live very close to freeways. And so if you can price a road and then reduce the amount of particulate matter and reduce the amount of benzene and carbon monoxide coming off that road, you get much less exposure that's falling into the houses and workplaces of people within 1,000, 1,500 feet of that road, and those tend to be lower income people, often lower income people who are more likely not to own cars. And so it's easy to forget that the status quo of an unpriced road is like more affluent people, because that's who drives disproportionately at peak hours, idling in traffic and creating pollution that really lands disproportionately on lower income people who drive less. And fixing that, which is one thing, it's not the main thing pricing does, but it's one thing pricing does, is itself very progressive. But absolutely, you need to use some of the revenue to take care of your landscaper or other low-income person.
Yeah, I'll echo what Mike said. In our analysis, we saw that higher income households, so above the median income in the Bay Area, which is $110,000 as household income. So about 50% of the population is above that threshold, but the share of peak hour drivers of those category of households is much higher than 50%, somewhere around 65% or so. And that's because they have more 9-to-5 jobs. They just because of how history of suburbanization has worked, more affluent people have moved away into suburbs and then commute to the inner cities to jobs. They also just drive more. And when we saw from our forecasting of the tolls that would be paid in the year 2035, over 75% of the tolls would be paid by that half of the population. So the lower income population has a lower share of tolls relative to their size of population. So, and even among those households, there's a much smaller share of households who are really frequently using the freeway, just cannot avoid driving, and so they would be the most burdened ones, and that's not too many households. For us, it was a positive outcome in that it provides opportunity for targeted cost burden relief, and there are multiple ways of doing that.
We've also been exploring low-income assistance, and we actually did 2 rounds of technical modeling of the 3 areas that I mentioned. In the second round, the more recent round of modeling, we assumed that low-income households would not pay at all. And we defined that around 200% of federal poverty. Also, HOV 3+ would not pay. And we can compare that results to our first round, which assumed everyone paid. And there's a drop-off in traffic reduction because there's less people getting the price signal to change when they drive or to take another mode. But it was an important understanding for us because it shows the different levers that we need to adjust to get the best balance of improving traffic flow, of air pollution benefits, making sure we're not placing a financial burden on low-income households. And I think what's important is even if we would do a full exemption, there's a way to do it up front where you get some kind of placard and you're just immune, right? Or having people pay and then you give them a credit, a budget to reimburse them or to give them money they could spend on the toll lanes or on, taking the bus, taking the train, possibly taking other private systems, building off the work that our team at Metro is doing with the City of LA on mobility wallets. So there's a lot of cool ways to do it. It's front and center of our analysis, but we want to make sure we're also, achieving enough traffic reduction to get the other benefits we're seeking.
Great. I think we have just a few more minutes left, so open to any audience questions if you have any that you'd like to share or ask. Oh, it's very dark. Can I go over here? Oh, and I think there's a mic coming back up to you.
So yeah, this kind of goes back to the comment about lightning lanes at Disneyland. So there was a really great documentary about FastPass and the dark side of it. I encourage anybody to look it up on YouTube called Complicated History, FastPass. And what came out of that is that for when you create a new system that allows some people to cut in line, you create a knowledge equity, not just the financial equity. So the people who know the system and know the ins and outs get a better experience compared to the people who don't have the time to research it, don't know the system. So what are you doing beyond the financial equity to deal with the knowledge gap that's inherent with creating a new way to essentially cut in line?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I think an important one, since we've mostly focused on the policy mechanics of this discussion and not less so on the technology mechanics of how pricing happens. So yeah, I would love any thoughts on that.
Move away from transponders, license plate readers. That's one. Makes it easy for everybody to use. That was my only idea. I'll think of more.
There's definitely more thinking to be done on that. Even license plate readers need to be associated with an account. That account, someone has to provide proof of their income, being low income, to be able to be eligible for that exemption or discount or whatever the strategy is. So yes, there is. We see that all the time in programs we have right now for, say, the Clipper Start program or the Express Lane Start program that provides 50% discounts or some discounted fares. People don't know that they have to enroll in it, let alone people not knowing how to enroll in it. There are so many people who just don't know that they have a transit option. And so we've talked about ideas of things like having a sort of an ambassador or a helpline, just connecting with folks and telling them what their options are. So a big part of any such program will have to be a considerable budget for outreach, public information, and letting people know what their options are. And yeah, so thanks for that question.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real concern, and there needs to be money for outreach. There needs to be ways to make people aware of their options, as is true for any government program. And one option too, especially for things like assistance, would be that you could just opt people in, right? The state should know their income, and you could opt lower income people into a mobility wallet. But I do think it's important to also just think about, like, what's the counterfactual, right? Which is to say, like, you could also just have this system that just doesn't work. Everybody sits in congestion, and there is a certain amount of equality in that. Like, it's like one nice thing about Los Angeles, if you have a lot of Schadenfreude, is you can be sitting on the 405 and realize, like, some celebrity is next to you, and you're like, see, even you can't escape congestion. But, like, that's like equality in misery, right? Which is not like the kind of equality we should strive for. We should have a government that provides high quality services and then does its best to bring everyone along, rather than say that our interest in equality so thoroughly trumps efficiency that we're just going to give everybody bad service and we can be comfortable with that.
Mark, anything you want to add?
Well, I think everyone said what I wanted to say, and I agree.
Do you want to add anything about Cal ITP?
So glad you asked. No, but it is an interesting question in thinking about not just how people pay for mobility or roads, but for mobility broadly. And if there are better ways that we can use technology and systems integration to allow people to qualify for not just a Clipper Start or the Life program here in LA, but then also get those benefits when they, say, rent a bike or when they are driving on the road, and how that those benefits can accrue with them and their vehicle, regardless of how they travel. So the Cal ITP program at the state level, working with the California Department of Technology, is really setting up that interoperable system that could work across different modes of transportation for exactly those reasons. So it's a great question. Thank you. I think we have an enthusiastic question over here. Yeah.
Thank you. A couple questions on.
If you don't mind, you can just do one, because we have a couple folks over here. Thanks.
I have to pick. We look at the ability to toll wealthy people without having an impact. We look at ways to subsidize lower income. And at least in LA, I think there's a growing movement about people who feel the middle class is being priced out of the city. So I'm just wondering how we address that whole issue. And also with Metro looking at 3 different programs for things like the Sepulveda Pass, it sometimes feels to the public that things are being done in silos, and you address some of it by saying, we have to provide the transportation first. Is that really going to happen, given that the approach seems to be done by silos?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Go Mark, jump in.
Yeah, so those are good questions. On the first, one can consider sliding scale exemptions. One can consider exemptions for people who need to use their vehicle for work, for people with disabilities, for public transit vehicles. So there's a whole set of details yet to be discussed. The point is if there's too many people who are exempt fully from any pricing program, it's really not worth doing because there isn't any benefits. So another way to think about it is what Mike has raised, is that what do people value time with their family or just the lack of stress of being stuck in traffic? And what is the trade-off between a fairly low cost for a better ride in your car, and having to pay? And so that is a big, it differs by person, it differs by trip, but it's something that we should always keep in our mind. There's a benefit, there'll be a benefit to it, and there'll be a cost. And how do we do that fairly? And the second question, you're correct, there are 3 projects in the Sepulveda Pass. We went out to 2 public meetings, all 3 together, for the reason that they're overlapping, and there's issues between the 3 of them to be resolved. For example, would we have, if we build express lanes in the 405 freeway, would we then come in and also do all-lane congestion pricing? And also issues between the Sepulveda rail project and any equipment that's on, or express lanes on the freeways. But you can be confident that as the different projects move forward, this technical analysis will make sure either we're prioritizing some over the others, we're making sure they can happen in a way that's good. But again, we appreciate you as a stakeholder interested both in fairness for working class and middle class families, and making sure that, as an agency funded by taxpayers, that we're doing our job well.
The only thing I would add to that is that, for all 3 of the regions considering this, and the question from the audience is a great reminder. It's a little too late for all of our regions, but everything is harder when you have a housing crisis, right? The reason the middle class is being driven out of all of the cities represented here is not because transportation's so expensive, it's housing's expensive. And, so if anyone is in the audience who's not from California, don't do what we did. Build housing. I mean, it really does. It's like once you screw that up, everything's harder.
Dose of reality there. I think we have time for one more question from over here. Yep. And I think the mic's coming to you.
I have a real nuts and bolts question because we don't have time for more involved things. We talked about transparency in pricing and its role in affecting people's transportation as it's done in Singapore. Yet I've never seen a congestion charging system in the United States, or the HOT lanes that we have in the Bay Area, for example, which tell you what you're getting for the money you spent. They'll say you can pay this much to this distance, but it doesn't say you'll save 10 minutes, or guarantee that you'll save 10 minutes. You don't pay if you don't actually save 10 minutes would be how you would do the guarantee. Don't you feel that if people actually could see what they were getting and know what they were getting, they might be more transparent, and you might actually get more people adapting to try? Has this ever been tried?
Great question. My panel?
The hot lanes say how long the drive time is for the hot lanes, but not the general purpose lanes.
Yeah, there's no stuck in traffic option to compare.
I like that.
It's not the most readily available thing, but if you go on metros. Yeah, no, don't look at. I was going to say that Metro regularly releases reports of its express lanes showing the difference between the congested and uncongested lanes. But yeah, I mean, if there was a way of saying, if you stay in this free lane, you're going to be stuck for 20 minutes. But the whole point is, because it's not priced, there's no way to know. You can know what the price lane will carry you, but you can't know the comparison because.
No, I'm telling you, I look at Waze, and if it says I'm only going to save 5 minutes and they want $6, then I say I'm not going to do it. And if it says I'm going to save more, I do it. It affects my purchase decisions. Now I'm rich, so that's bad. But I think a lot of other people would do the same thing. Yeah. I mean, comparatively rich to the people we're talking about.
We're all going to go talk to that guy after the panel. No, thank you. It's a great question, though. No, and I think it's a great question, though, around not just what we've talked about here today around the communication of these trade-offs to people in advance of a project, but also those ongoing and regular communications with the community as the projects are being actively managed, to make sure that you understand what the benefits are and what is accruing to your travel time. Thank you all so much for participating in this. Thank you.